This is Up Close. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. Hillary Clinton is one of the most discussed political figures in the United States of recent decades and is currently the frontrunner by far in early discussion of the Democratic presidential nomination race for 2016. But what can we learn from her run as Secretary of State? Two veteran political reporters, Jonathan Allen and Amie Parnes, discussed her activity since the 2008 election in HRC State Secrets and the Rebirth of Hillary Clinton. Also, while Hillary Clinton is known as something of a Democratic hardliner on Israel, a portion of the Jewish community is not only not sharing that position on Israel, but is actually taking an anti-Zionist approach. I interview one of the intellectual leaders of that movement, Max Blumenthal, author of Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel. But first, here's my interview with Jonathan Allen and Amie Parnes. So Hillary Clinton, broadly expected to be a contender in 2016 and is a frontrunner in a way probably almost no one has been in anything like recent memory. So what do we learn from your book that we need to know for 2016?
I think what you learn is how she makes decisions, and particularly in the most prominent role that she's had, as a senator, even as First Lady. These are not positions where you manage big bureaucracies. The State Department, 70,000 people flung across the world. I think what you really get out of the book is a sense of what her priorities are, how she manages people, what she's learned from past mistakes and what she hasn't learned from past mistakes. And so as a result of that, I think you can project a little bit about how she would govern if she were president of the United States.
And one of the interesting things about the way that you put it together is that a lot of books about Washington, a lot of books about government deal with motivations and who's motivated to do this, that, and the other thing. But a lot of what you describe about Hillary's process is relationships and how relationships drive a lot of her decision making and how she gets things done.
This is somebody who works hard at relationships. She doesn't have the natural charisma or charm of her husband. Few of us do, but that's the instantaneous comparison that everyone makes. As a result, I think in politics, she really has to work harder to impress people.
A woman who sent 16,000 thank you notes after the campaign ended, and then after her State Department time, she sent out another several thousand. She likes to have a personal touch. She likes to make connections with people, and I think that's, if we were to compare her to the current president, he's often criticized for being aloof and not having that touch. She and her husband are actually different creatures. They like to have that relationship.
And also a consideration is exactly how she's looked upon as a Secretary of State. And right now we're in the middle of seeing America's foreign policy seeming to blow up, that we've got problems in Crimea, we've got further problems in Syria, we've got problems in Turkey. As we speak, Israel's defense minister gave a speech saying he feels America's strength is weakening and America is losing its status as the global policeman, and he's not sure what that's, and that maybe Israel now has to feel like it is a lone actor in the world.
But one thing that Secretary Clinton always, I think as senator she had a tougher approach, and she felt like Israel comes first, and she made that point known. And I think Republicans we talked to Ileana Ros-Lehtinen for this book, who basically said, it's a shame that she wasn't as tough as Secretary of State as she was when she was senator and as Israel friendly. I think she will probably creep back to that side as she runs in 2016.
And we think the Israel policy was really handled by the White House early in the Obama administration. So the State Department obviously had some role in the Israel policy, but not, for the most part, not until the very end when she ended up flying in to work on that ceasefire.
Well, but she was involved in, for example, calling for a freeze on settlement building in, I believe that would have been 2009, 2010.
Right, very early.
And so what was she actually doing on the Israel front in those years?
It's a reasonable question. I think she was going with the Obama policy. I don't think there's any question about that. It was part and parcel of that was there was some suspicion within Obama's foreign policy councils about her allegiance to him after the 2008 primary. So there was no daylight between the two of them for the first couple of years. And then once she started to get, once she was accepted more as somebody who was loyal to him, I think she started to assert herself a little bit more on a variety of issues.
And I think people know that, you do work for your boss. And so I think that there's some room there that people understand that she was actually, working for President Obama and not really able to assert what she really felt.
And now my interview with Max Blumenthal. You're probably one of the intellectual leaders of a group of Jews who've become essentially anti-Zionist. And I wonder if you could talk about, first, how you came to that, and then how you feel that's going.
Well, I didn't seek this nomination, Stephen. But I don't know if I would consider myself a leader of any group because I don't actively play any leadership role, and it's kind of like such a disorganized and disparate group that hasn't really cohered around any clear goal. I mean, there are two-staters among the group. There are one-staters. There are no-staters. The only thing that I think they've cohered around is the tactic of BDS as a means of exerting external pressure, which is clearly moving into the mainstream.
Right, and you would call yourself a one-stater, right?
I wouldn't say that necessarily. I mean, that's not the issue here. But the issue here for me is, I came to this, of course, as a journalist, and my book is a work of mostly journalism and history and analysis. And also, I mean, I'm a Jewish American, and when you're Jewish American, as you know, Zionism calls on you. I mean, I was asked to go on a free trip to Israel after spending time in Hebrew school, after being, fairly, close, or at least on the periphery of Jewish communal life. So it's an issue you have to engage with.
You're talking about the Birthright Israel trip.
Just the concept of Israel. But I'm talking about the Birthright Israel trip. And so I went on that trip. And the goal of, Taglit, Birthright, ultimately, besides preventing assimilation in the U.S., is to build a lifelong connection between you and Israel. And that worked on me, just not in the way they wanted.
When your book came out, it generated some controversy, but it's been largely ignored by many Jewish outlets. But Eric Alterman in The Nation chose to review it, and he described it as something that could be a book of the Hamas Book of the Month Club. And you took offense at this, and I'm actually after reading the book, it genuinely led me to wonder, what exactly do you take offense of with that description? It's not clear in the sense that, and I think a number of people have actually addressed this, that you don't address the Palestinian Authority or Hamas almost at all in the book, and so it's not at all clear if you have any disagreement with any parties other than the Israeli government.
This book is primarily about Israeli society. Of course, there's a picture of life, of Palestinian life under occupation, of Bedouin life in the Negev desert as Israel seeks to forcibly remove 40 to 70,000 of them and put them on what amount to Indian reservations. I tell the story of the 60,000 non-Jewish African refugees in Israel, but primarily it's about Israel since 2009, when the most right-wing government in its history came into power and really consolidated its hold, not just over government, but over the key institutions of society, from the army to the Shabak to the education ministry and the education system.
To me, reading your book, it was clear that you had a great many criticisms of the way Israel is constructed, of the way Israel was founded, and it left me wondering, exactly what you feel should be the response to these facts, in the sense that these facts are more or less known to most international bodies, to most international leaders. And the international consensus has been to search for a two-state solution. But that's not your response.
I think it's my job to raise questions that aren't being asked. And I really owe you a lot of credit for allowing me to raise these questions. I mean, the reason that there's a suppression campaign is that these questions, that the Jewish establishment in the U.S. has no answer for these questions. So you asked about Hamas. Hamas is the elected leadership of Gaza. They're very repressive. I'm not going to make really any apologies for them, but they wouldn't exist if the Gaza Strip did not consist of 80% refugees who are living there simply because they're not Jewish, and their return to the land that their families previously lived on, which is mandated by Resolution 194 in the UN resolution, would mean the end of a Jewish state, because it would upset the demographic balance. And so they have to live in this dystopic panopticon-style ghetto, besieged on all sides, simply because they're not Jewish. That's 80% of the population of the Gaza Strip. And so my question is, why is the pro-Israel community singling Israel out for special treatment when it would all at the same time, at least its more humane members, agitate for the return of Syrian refugees to their homes in Daraa who've been driven out by Assad, who agitated for the passage of the Dayton Accords, allowing ethnic Albanians to return to their homes, who would agitate for the return of refugees anywhere else in Darfur, or Chad, or Central Africa, anywhere else except in Israel-Palestine. And so that's the issue.
That's all for this week's abbreviated web episode of Up Close. A reminder, you can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish channel on cable, or listen to the full audio of the show as a podcast, available on iTunes and your favorite podcast player. The Jewish channel is available on cable, Time Warner Cable Channel 528, IO Optimum Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, Cox Cable Channel 1, Frontier Communications, and on Comcast in the on-demand menu under Premium Channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.